Dawson, who is the founder of North Road Geo, and it is a bridge between ESRI and QGIS. One of the first things I want to mention is the ArcGIS to QGIS in One Easy Lesson with SLYR presentation by Ann Scott that was part of the FOSS4G UK online conference. You can see the YouTube link at the top of the page. It is an excellent resource demonstrating A/B testing between QGIS and ARC for various different complex symbologies and projects, and is a very good resource to get a better feeling of exactly how well SLYR can render various different ARC projects, as well as some of the current pitfalls in terms of what things need to be sort of worked around manually and what things aren't directly supported. In my talk, I'm going to be looking at a little bit different aspect of SLYR. So I do believe that this is a great additional resource that people should review. So first I want to talk a little bit about who is behind SLYR, and that would be North Road, the company, as well as Nyall Dawson. North Road is a cartographic services company that also contributes a ton of core development effort to QGIS, GDAL, and other related projects, as well as being available for hire for cartographic analysis. Nyall Dawson is the founder of that company, and I've also included a screenshot of his GitHub contributions for the 2020 year. You can see the graph shows a large number of commits, code reviews, pull requests, and very few issues. So basically, it's a wealth of effort and development being directed at QGIS and other adjacent projects. So he's an incredibly important contributor and driving a lot of the development that we maybe take for granted in terms of the things that QGIS can do and has been able to do over the years. So like I said, just a ton of driving vision and effort. Myself, I am a Master's of Science in Environmental Science with a focus on remote sensing. My GitHub graph, if you take a look, is mostly issues. So you might have seen me around GitHub filing feature request issues and other things like that. I've been trying to collate sample data for testing against upcoming changes in GDAL and QGIS for Evan Ralt and Nyall Dawson. And that's actually what sort of got me involved with SLYR and taking a look at how it works. Currently, SLYR is basically in two different worlds. There is an open source snapshot posted on Nyall's GitHub. I provided a link for that. This is a very simplistic early version of SLYR that allows to parse and convert ArcDesktop .style files. Unlike the name would suggest, .layer files are not supported yet. So basically what you can do with this is color swatches, symbology, including line, marker, and fill, and color ramps. I learned about this initially through the work of Stephanie Fan, and I've linked to her GitHub as well. And she converted the ESRI included styles to QGIS styles. On my end, I decided to convert some of the color palettes because I found that there were some very pleasing color palettes available as ARC defaults, and it also will allow you to help match existing products if you are able to use that exact same color ramp and color palette.
Hey, Brett, I'm going to interrupt really quick. It looks like we're not seeing your web browser that you're referring to on your screen. So maybe if you can put it on the same screen with your presentation, we might be able to see that.
Whoop. All right.
Or you could just share your whole desktop.
Yeah, stop sharing and then share the whole desktop.
All right. I just had the presentation up, so I don't actually have the browser open. All right. So sorry about that. And the other sort of fork of SLYR is currently a donationware. It's divergent from the free open source release in that it has been seeing continual updates and improvements. It is a donation. Basically, you're licensing the product for now. North Road and Nyall are both, like I've mentioned before, huge proponents of open source and have a long and very well documented record of providing core contributions to QGIS. And in light of that, they have an open source pledge for SLYR specifically. Basically, the way it works right now is you're donating by purchasing an early access license of SLYR to get access to these features that are not available to the public yet. That funding is used to improve development on SLYR itself, as well as also to provide additional features to QGIS, GDAL, and other libraries as needed. So since that development is working in this way, the plugin is currently closed, but once it is considered feature complete and the underlying features that are necessary to support the core functionality of the plugins are in place in QGIS and GDAL, the plugin will be open sourced, much like the current version is.
Hey, Brett, we're still on that first slide.
Really? Oh boy.
Yeah, I think the best thing would be to stop sharing your screen for a moment and then reshare it with as full desktop or full screen, whatever it's called.
And is it visible now?
Yes, that looks good. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. Go back real quick. I guess since a lot of this wasn't visible, I will post the slides probably on my GitHub to make these links more readily available. And if anybody has any further questions or needs anything else, please don't hesitate to contact me. But I will quickly just preview these slides because I was just made aware that no one has been able to see these. This is for Ant's talk. This is Nyall's graph, as well as the link to his GitHub, link to my GitHub, link to 2 GitHub repos showing converted styles as well as converted palettes, and the link to the repo for SLYR itself in the open source release.
And we're still not seeing them for some reason. So I wonder if we need to be out of presentation mode, unfortunately, and just show them individually. I don't know.
That's what I ended up doing in the workshop this morning. So I think if you leave it on this view, you can switch between the
Yeah, that'll work.
I think that's probably our best bet given the challenges, which is not you. I had the same problems this morning. So.
All right. Well, thank you again. I am so sorry, everyone. Here's Ant's talk. Here's Nyall's graph. My graph, more links, and I'll provide all of these later. One of the things that I wanted to focus on was just how beneficial the donation model for SLYR has been to a bunch of tools that some of us might not actually know have been funded by SLYR's development. And this idea came from Kurt. So thank you, Kurt, for giving me the inspiration for this. So what I did is I basically searched on the QGIS repo for SLYR, and there's over 38 improvements as of today, or 38, over 30 rather, improvements, and 1 so far to GDAL. SLYR itself, and again, this is the current donationware release, has seen a large number of improvements and updates since its first inception. It is constantly being worked on. You can see usually about a month or maybe sometimes multiple times per month between updates. And again, some of this variability in update time is due to underlying capabilities in QGIS and GDAL and other libraries needing to be created, fixed, or expanded upon before SLYR can do that function. And that's why the model is the way it is at the moment. In terms of integration into QGIS itself, it integrates very neatly as a plugin. It provides an extra panel in your options where you can tweak things like conversion, symbol size. You can also call out paths to things like Inkscape to edit SVGs that have been embedded. So more or less a plug and forget type of plugin. Very much works smoothly in the background without requiring too much of your headspace to actually figure out how to make it work. So the user experience in that way, in my opinion, has been excellent. As a quick example, and I apologize for the Chrome of LibreOffice being over the image. We have on the left the QGIS browser panel showing the MXD, PMF, layer files all natively in the browser. And on the bottom half, you can see the preview part of the browser showing the ARC document metadata. So things like title, author, description, summary, tags, all of that is able to be parsed by SLYR and viewed in QGIS and also converted into a QGIS project where there is an analog of that functionality available at the moment. So basically, it's as simple as navigating to an MXD in the browser, double-clicking it, dragging and dropping it into the window, or even using the file open dialog to open the project directly. So very much a integrated and native feeling experience. I am sorry for that. So easy to use. What we have here is a more complex project that has a number of different layers with symbols and stuff like that, that was converted using SLYR into a QGIS QGZ project. There were a few things that didn't convert over. Some of the labels were written in BASIC, which does not have a conversion at the moment, but that was sort of an expected issue because those also don't render properly in Arc Pro. So there was really no difference there, but the project loads, works just fine. In terms of some limitations I've seen in usage, a big one right now is annotation support. Not every ARC project makes heavy usage of annotations, but some do, and they can provide critical context to the viewer of either the data or an end product, such as a map layout. So we sort of have a feature gap right now in QGIS where annotations aren't working exactly the same way, especially if you're coming from an ESRI world where you would expect it to work. To that end, there are a number of updates going into QGIS, especially target for 3.16 and above, that will make that more likely to have feature parity and would also allow us to convert those ESRI annotations into a QGIS type annotation. Excuse me. Another limitation we have at the moment, but is on the roadmap eventually for SLYR, is the ArcGIS Pro file formats. They're fundamentally different than the file formats for Arc Desktop being Arc 10 and below. So things like MapX, LayerX, and StyleX. They are able to be parsed partially at the moment by SLYR in testing builds, but much like how the process has worked for the Arc Desktop file formats, there are changes that might be required in underlying QGIS and other libraries to support them fully. A big one for many people, especially if you work with 3D data, is the ESRI TIN data. Most of the heavy lifting on TIN type data is currently being performed with MDAL by Lutra Consulting. And there are adjacent features being planned for QGIS 3.18 and above that will allow much more one-to-one support for ESRI TINs being loaded from external raster sources. So basically a flat file source, not something stored in a file GeoDatabase. And that's an important distinction that I will get into in a little bit. Currently, ARC scene documents are supported by SLYR. However, they basically only import the 2D scene data and styling, where the 3D data and styling, as well as the 3D view extent, are dropped. Part of that is because there was, up until earlier this week, no library support in the QGIS Style Manager for 3D style objects. Nyall has submitted that pull request, so in the future, it would be much more likely to have a conversion and storage of the 3D symbol directly into QGIS when loading a ARC scene document. And a little bit more of a stretch goal for SLYR is editing of hosted features. If you work with any organizations that have either ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Portal, ArcGIS Server, editing of hosted features is a huge pain point. So, let's say you were able to load this corporate MXD document that everyone else in your organization is using, and you want to edit a feature, you would not be able to do that right now. unless the feature is offline or in a GeoDatabase. So with this plan functionality, one would be able to use the editing tools in QGIS, which many would argue are superior or at least potentially more comfortable against ArcGIS Online and ArcPortal data, which would be completely seamless, just like you do it now. If you've been using ArcGIS Online, you might have sort of had to do the dance between ArcViewer, the map viewer standard, which allows for table support and things like that, but doesn't allow you to edit points, versus Viewer Beta, which allows you to edit point features, but doesn't allow you to edit table features. So you would have to not deal with that sort of shuffling around of tools, because you'd be able to use all your native Q tools on this hosted data without having to worry about interoperability and compatibility issues. So potentially allowing for a completely different workflow. A limitation that I've seen in my professional capacity working for a small local government is some of the pain points of working in a mixed deployment. The big one is the ESRI file GeoDatabase format. It is proprietary, not documented. There is a closed source driver that does allow read and write, but it is not thread safe, which means that in multi-threaded applications and environments, it can crash or corrupt data. It's also very black box and hasn't seen much support or update since its initial release. And it has very limited support for various different generations of file GeoDatabase. So you can't be guaranteed that, you know, a database from 10.3 would work versus 10.1 or 9.3. To that end, Evan Ralt has written a QGIS enhancement proposal to support ESRI raster data from a file GeoDatabase. There is an open source tool that can currently, Raster Rescue, can read the raster data out to something like a GeoTIFF. But the plan would be to have read-write support potentially, as well as potentially RATs, or raster attribute tables, which are a database structure that assigns a value or key or term to each raster cell value. So let's say 0 is background, 1 is tree, 2 is pavement. You can classify a raster image and still have that sort of vector type rich data associated with it, as well as stored color maps. So the raster would be able to be loaded into a workspace with a defined color map instead of just randomly assigned colors. Another change that would need to happen in GDAL would be vector support. I've linked to the issue, the QGIS EP there. Currently, spatial index support is coming down the pipe. This is a huge win because not only does spatial index support for file GeoDatabase mean that vector data will render orders of magnitude, in many cases, faster than it does currently because it's unindexed at the moment. It also opens the door for writing back features to a file GeoDatabase, which before would not have been possible because you would have either corrupted these spatial tables or destroyed them entirely. Sorry about that. A big one that potentially could happen is compression. If you've worked with file GeoDatabases before, either creating them or downloading them from certain government or private company portals, the vector features can be compressed. This can mean huge savings in file size, so it's very useful. But the compression is not documented and has to be reverse engineered. With compression support, you'd be able to open pretty much any format you could come across in terms of a file GeoDatabase without worrying about how the data was prepared and submitted to the portal. And one of the final things that is planned under that QEP or follow-on QEPs would be domains and relations. In the file GeoDatabase, you can store domains and relations for vector features. So things like DOT data lean very heavily on this. You have coded values for, let's say, a pavement type or a roadway type. And instead of having a list of numbers that you don't really know, the relation and domain functions would basically use a lookup table to replace the actual database stored value of 0 with something like local highway. So that's, again, a huge improvement in terms of operating within and viewing data from this type of mixed deployment. Something I didn't even get onto the slides, but is coming down the pipe. It looks like with Arc Pro 2.6 and above, GeoPackage will finally see editing support. So that might be another aspect of this bridge to sort of interact in this mixed environment. Going back to just how much work has gone into QGIS and GDAL and all the other libraries as a result of SLYR, I've highlighted some pull requests. Hash lines. Everybody loves hash lines. And I'm sure a lot of us have used them, especially if you ever wanted to visualize a road network or a rail network. Text formats in the style manager, being able to make a library of different text styles and to easily drag and drop them onto a layer. These are all things that are a result of the work that's been done by Nyall and others. Combining style databases. So you can grab a bunch of different people's style databases, mash them together. Center of segment, marker placement, random fill marker to basically generate more cartographically pleasing fill patterns within polygons. Setting a color for no data in a raster that can help you look for holes and sinks. It's very good for visual analysis, and it could also be important for cartographic styling. Bookmark manager, so you can manipulate bookmarks. Options to control very detailed parameters of pie diagrams in terms of whether they're clockwise, counterclockwise, spacing on bar diagrams, customization of axes on the diagrams, paint support for diagrams. So now your diagrams could have maybe a drop shadow, outer glow, things of that nature to make them pop more against background data. Nitty-gritty styling for scale bars, number formats, tick marks, all things like that. Just gives us way more control. And a lot of these things are coming in because the goal with SLYR is to have one-to-one support of different styling and cartographic features found in ARC projects. So a lot of these things needed to be in place to reach that goal of having that clean support. So we're sort of getting the benefit of, in base QGIS, we're getting the benefit of all these cartographic and styling improvements because of this project. Another important one is marker items. To be a north arrow, you can use very complex styling to generate a marker. And instead of having to render it out as a PNG or an SVG, you can just generate it either with a geometry generator or something like that and associate it as the document's north arrow. So it opens the door for way more power. About time. So I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit more here. Legend patch shapes. This is a small feature that has a big impact, especially being able to freely customize the shape of the various items in the legend to show a good example of, like, let's say a river versus a road. Project open handlers. This allows you to open, let's say, ARC documents from the file open dialog. Let's see another big one here. You can see the document metadata here. Embeddable images and QGIS layouts. If you are preparing products for clients, this can save you from having to bundle logos and other graphics externally from the project. It just makes project management a lot easier. So that's also a huge win for us. All right, let me check here. And I believe at this point, I am about out on my time. So I would like to wrap up here and field questions from anyone that has questions.
So I think most of the questions that came up in the chat on YouTube got answered throughout the course of the talk, but what we can do is have you follow up with the YouTube chat after the fact. We need to switch over to the next talk, but thank you, Brett, so much for this talk. I am super excited to try this new plugin out. I just learned about it today. So thank you very much for this overview, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.